Meet Timmy, a young and hungry boy who needs nutrients and energy, and meet Burger, the unsuspecting bundle of nutrients who is about to be eaten. Now in this topic, nutrition in humans, we are going to be talking about the gross but true story of how you, like Timmy, obtain nutrients and energy from food. Now to begin with, what is nutrition? Well, it is the process by which organisms obtain nutrients and energy for growth, repair, and maintenance of their body. Now, as a quick recap, what are the nutrients that can be found in this burger? What are the nutrients that we were learning about in our last topic? Well, hopefully, these things came to mind, right? Especially carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Right? They also have vitamins and minerals as well, but carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, we'll be looking at them a lot more in this topic. Now, here's the big question for this topic. You see Timmy here, and you see this burger. Now, Timmy is made out of many microscopic, tiny body cells, different types of cells. Now, this burger is a lot bigger than the cells in Timmy's body. So here's the big question. How do Timmy's, or our body cells, obtain nutrients and energy from the food we eat? Well, surely you can't just take this burger and feed it directly to the cells. Right? That'd be ridiculous. After all, the cells are so much smaller than the burger. So what processes need to take place in order for our very tiny body cells to obtain nutrients and energy from the food that we eat? That is the big question that we're going to answer in this topic. So in this first video, we're just going to talk very briefly about what are the different stages, processes in animal nutrition. And this can be found in your textbook on the following pages depending on whether you're in pure biology or combined biology. So here's our big question again. Right? How do our tiny body cells obtain nutrients and energy from the food that we eat, which is usually much bigger than the cells? Well, nutrition happens in 4 stages. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, it's quite simple, right? First, you got to eat the food. And that's precisely what it is. The first stage in nutrition is ingestion, eating the food. And that's followed by breaking down the food into simpler substances that we call digestion. And the next stage is actually absorbing those nutrients. So we call that absorption. And finally, it is making use of those nutrients. The body cells making use of those nutrients, which we call assimilation. Okay, so make sure you know these 4 stages and make sure you learn how to spell it, right? Especially assimilation. This one always gets students. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the details of each stage. And what you really need to know is the definition of each stage. Alright, often in the exam, they will ask you to define the stages, and it's really easy marks if you memorize it. So let's begin with ingestion. Well, ingestion is simply the process where food is taken into the body. And the organ which is involved is clearly the mouth, right? Hopefully it is nothing else, right? Just the mouth. Alright, next up we have digestion. Now digestion is the process where large food molecules are broken down into smaller and soluble food molecules, right? So that these smaller soluble food molecules can be absorbed into body cells. So large food molecules, for example, right, we learned about some in our last topic. Starch, a complex carbohydrate, right, protein, and fat. They need to be broken down into smaller and soluble food molecules. So for example, we learned that starch eventually is broken down to glucose, right? Proteins, yep, amino acids. And fats are broken down into your fatty acids and glycerol. So digestion is basically breaking down these large food molecules into smaller soluble ones so that they can be absorbed. Now, it's probably helpful at this point to point out that there are 2 types of digestion, which you might remember from your secondary 2. And the first type is called physical digestion. Now this is simply the mechanical breakdown, right? Because we use force, of mechanical force, to break down food into smaller pieces. Right, so you might think of a good example is the teeth in your mouth, which chew and cut and grind food into smaller pieces. So for example, you might have a very big piece of starch here, right, that comes from your burger bread, and we break it down into smaller pieces of starch. So you call this, maybe this is big starch clump. You break it down into smaller starch pieces. Notice that there is no change in substance. On this side is starch, a big piece of starch, and on this side we get smaller pieces of starch. It's still starch. But the main reason why we have physical digestion is so that we can increase the surface area for enzymes to act on. We learned in the last topic that salivary amylase, or at least amylase, acts on starch to break it down to maltose. Right, so imagine, if it was just a big piece of starch, then amylase can only act on starch from the outside. But if we break it down into many smaller pieces, notice that the surface area exposed, the surface area which amylase can act on, is a lot more. So physical digestion increases surface area for enzymes to act on. Now, chemical digestion, on the other hand, is the breakdown of large food molecules like starch, into smaller soluble molecules like maltose and eventually glucose. Okay, so we have now starch being broken down to maltose and eventually to glucose. Right, notice that for chemical digestion, it usually involves enzymes, like we learned. Amylase is involved. And there's a change in substance, right? Starch is being changed into maltose, and that is a change in substance. So that's different from physical digestion. Alright, next we have absorption. So once we've digested our food, we absorb it. So absorption is the process where digested food substances like glucose, like amino acids, fatty acids are absorbed into body cells. And we all know that this takes place mostly in the small intestine. Alright? And finally, we have assimilation. And this process is where the food substances, after being absorbed, so the absorbed food substances are then used by cells to produce energy and also to synthesize new protoplasm, right? To make new cell membranes, new cytoplasm, and new nuclei. And now that we've obtained nutrients from the digested food, what happens to the undigested food? And look at this picture, you already know. Probably thinking of your S word, but no, we have a more refined word for that as scientists. We call it egestion. Right, egestion is what you do in the toilet. Tell your mother next time that you're egesting. Egestion is the removal of undigested food from the body. Okay? Undigested food, not waste. Right, a lot of people like to write the removal of waste. But if it's food that is undigested, it is not waste because this food might still contain some nutrients. For example, it might still contain cellulose, it might still contain your fiber, which actually has nutritional value, it has nutrients inside. It's just that our body is not able to digest it. Great, so that's the end of the first video. Just a quick check that you know what are the 4 stages of nutrition and are able to define them and to arrange them in the correct order. That's all.